Hey there, rock and roll podcast fans. This is Mike Hoban. Welcome to Rat Tales, the podcast that brings you the music and stories of the Boston rock scene that grew out of the mid-'70s at the Rat and some of the other hellhole joints. Hey everybody, this is Mike Hoban from Rat Tales, and we're here today with Mach Bell, former lead singer of the Joe Perry Project, but more importantly, especially for us in Rat Tales land, the former lead singer of the legendary Thundertrain. I was listening to him this morning, and Jesus, they were like, man. They were a really, really good band. If you go to YouTube, check it out, and I'm sure Lenny just played a cut, but geez, it's great to have you here today, Mach.
Thanks, Mike. Very happy to still be standing and be here.
Above ground is always a good thing. Once we hit, if we were around during the Rat, being above ground is a good thing. But just for our audience, we gotta. So his name's Cowboy Mach Bell, and it's not Mach with my Boston accent. It's Mach, M-A-C-H, like Mach 5. So why don't you explain your name so people are familiar with it? You don't have to go into too much detail, but
yeah, there was a guy from Washington D.C. or a guy playing in D.C. called Mach Bell, and I didn't want to get mixed up with that guy. Not because I didn't even know the guy, but I wanted to be a rock star too, and he looked like he was a little ahead of me. So I changed my name to Mach Bell. I was originally Mark, because the DJs in Boston, when they played our first singles, they'd say, "And here comes Mach Bell and Thundertrain," because that's how we say it in Boston. Yep. Mach Bell from Washington D.C. came up here, ended up playing with Richard Hell, and then he joined the Ramones as the drummer of the Ramones. So Mach Bell had to change his name to Marky Ramone. So then I was Mach Bell, and he was Marky Ramone, and there was nobody named Mach Bell.
Oh, that's a really funny side story. Oh, that's hilarious.
Back in the Rat days, which is the 70s, I was just Mach Bell. I never was Cowboy until the 80s.
Okay.
That happened later.
Any story from that?
Well, there's a horrible story that a Cowboy. I'll save the story. we'll stop with the Marky Ramone story. But yeah, it has nothing to do with woohoo.
Okay.
Riding rope 'em.
Yeah, you look more like a rock and roll guy than a cowboy. I just don't see you riding the range. So what do we like to do is I always love to find out how people end up, what were your influences, what'd you do? I know I know a little bit about your history. I know that your dad was an audio engineer, and I think his dad might have been involved in the music business too. So why don't you tell that story? I think it's great.
I'm the son of a sound man. My grandfather dropped out of Dartmouth College in 1929 when the loudspeaker was invented. When the commercial loudspeaker came out. He knew that a loudspeaker was going to change the world, where a guy who wants to be president doesn't just have to yell through a megaphone, "Vote for me," but could speak into a microphone. He got an investor, and within months, my My grandfather, Nelson, was the sound man for the whole East Coast of the United States, doing everything from putting sound into Fenway Park, Symphony Hall, Boston Garden, and then he would do conventions for the big political parties. And so he was climbing up poles, hanging speakers, and doing what you have to do to run sound back in 1929, 1930, all through the 30s, 40s. My dad came of age in the 50s and joined the company. Besides being a sound company, it also was a retail audio company, which went in the 50s from being record players and radios to stereo. And my dad was one of the first people to get on the stereo bandwagon, and he actually went to the Brussels World Fair in '58 with a plane load of Klipschorn loudspeakers and Ampex tape decks, and they set up in a theater in Brussels. They did a train reproduction where people sitting in a theater would hear a train coming from over there, and then it would seemingly cross the stage and then leave there, all through audio. This whole idea of stereo sound separation was brand new and unique, and such a big part of what would happen in the 60s. For me, having nothing to do with my family, listening to my Jimi Hendrix records and my Moby Grape albums with that stereo, which was so much used in the 60s, not so much now. They mix everything pretty much across the range. In case the stereo signal goes down, you still want to be able to hear the whole AC/DC. But you remember those old...
A friend of mine told me this story. He said the first time that he ever smoked pot, he put on A Whole Lot of Love by Led Zeppelin, and it goes from one side to the other, and he said he flipped out and, I think he had to go to the hospital or something. So, stereo definitely was, played a huge, with all those giant Marshall, the stacks of Marshall amps that they had at Woodstock and everything else, and and that's why I'm deaf now.
My dad didn't sell musical instruments and didn't sell Marshall amps, so that was left to the third generation of the Bells. But I did, having my grandfather and my dad both in the sound business, I grew up with a microphone in my hand. My dad would set up an oscilloscope, and I'd be there with my microphone and, making those little wave patterns, audio waveforms. So it was no wonder that I eventually ended up fronting bands and holding on to microphones. Although it was not apparent to me back then, I started off on the cello when I was 10. I was the president of the school orchestra, and didn't get my first electric guitar until I was 13.
When you hit puberty and realized that's how you get girls?
I guess when I hit puberty, I was confused. I was really excited about the sound of the fuzz tone that I heard on Heart Full of Soul and Satisfaction. I don't know what I was more excited about, the guitar or the fuzz pedal. And so I guess what I was really excited about, besides my fuzz tone, was that I could put together a band on my own street. I had a drummer that lived up the street.
What, is that Bobby?
This is before Bobby.
Okay.
This was Joey Hamway. But I could put together these. I started with the Mechanical Onions.
Great name.
The Mechanical
Totally
Onions.
60s.
Yeah, it was a takeoff on the Electric Prunes. But, and we started playing the Battle of the Bands, which was the thing back then. In our town, Holliston, which is about 30 miles west of Boston, was a big Battle of the Bands town. We had a strong JCs. So we'd have battles. Church halls would hire bands. Teen centers. This is back when the drinking age is 21. Teenage years last forever, and then there's even more years before you're old enough to be an adult. So people realized that the kids needed something to do, and teen centers were springing up all over.
Yep, I remember.
And kids were dancing. This was all with the fallout from the British invasion, which got everybody up dancing and either playing in the band or dancing or wanting to be part of that whole scene. And so we were kind of recreating our own little hullabaloo and shindig in these teen centers all over the place.
Those are television shows for people that are too young to remember.
I was very aware. I listened to WBZAM. That was my link to the outside world, and I was very aware of the surf Nantasket, the surf Salisbury Beach, which were big rock clubs, teenage rock clubs that were hiring bands like Barry and the Remains, Multi and the Barbarians. Rockin' Ramrods. These were our answer to the British invasion. And I was trying to do that myself in my own little town, in my local teen center. To me, that was the first generation of Boston rock that I was familiar with, those bands. There was generations of rock last for only 5 years.
Oh, yeah.
Because the second generation came in when the focus left the British invasion, came back to America with the L.A. and San Francisco bands. In L.A., they had the Monkees, the Mamas and the Papas, the Doors, Love, and up in San Francisco, Dead, Jefferson Airplane, Moby Grape. We answered that from Bosstown with the Ramrods became Fluff or Puff, and Fluff were the band up from Framingham that got signed, and Eden's Children, and Ultimate Spinach, and Orpheus, and it was a huge catalog of bands that all came together in that generation.
Orpheus was like one of the first shows that you saw, right?
Yes. 1969, Led Zeppelin, the Led Zeppelin. They were still being billed as the Led Zeppelin at the Carousel Tent in Framingham. It was an interesting week. There was a bigger show going on. Woodstock in New York that same week. And a lot of my friends went to Woodstock if they could scrape together. I mean, it cost a fortune. It was almost $20 to get the ticket for the 3 days. No way I didn't have that kind of money. And even the Led Zeppelin wanted $6, which I'd seen Jimi Hendrix the year before for $5. I'm like, $6? But the good thing I knew with the tent was they would raise the tent flaps on a hot August night, and you could sit on the hills and listen to the show for free. So my friends and I went to go listen to the Led Zeppelin show for free, and we get there, and Orpheus is playing. Can't Find the Time to Tell You.
A great song.
The huge prom ballad hit of this region. In the crowd, I could see that a lot of the people that had snatched up tickets for this Led Zeppelin, whatever that was, show, were really there to see Orpheus. And I was right, because as soon as Orpheus played the last note, sha-la-la-la, can't find the time, the tent empties out.
I can't find the time to tell you. I can't find the time to tell you. So many things to say, I could fit them in a book, fit them in a book of 1,000 pages, yeah. So many people say that I couldn't tell a lie, couldn't tell a lie in 1,000 pages. Baby, oh, baby, you're right. Ba-da-da-da-da-da-da, I can't find the time to tell you. Ba-da-da-da-da-da-da, I can't find the time to tell you.
I later found out it was Peter Grant and one of the other famous Led Zeppelin road manager guy people came out of the tent and waved all of us kids in to paper the house and just get butts in the seats for this new band. They'd toured America a few times already in '69, right here in town at the Boston Tea Party, but this is the first time they played the big town of Framingham, Mass.
The real big time.
So yeah, that was my first time seeing Orpheus. I think they were the first of the Bosstown bands that I got to see. I ended up seeing a few of the others, Ultimate Spinach, Beacon Street Union, but
Beacon Street Union played at my high school.
yeah, I mean, that was a huge thing. And so my generation, which includes a lot of the people we're going to talk about that came out of the Rat scene, I'm sure also were very aware of those first two generations of Boston rock, the one that echoed or answered back to the British invasion, the one that answered back to the San Francisco and West Coast. We learned a lot from that. We wanted to be original rock bands, and we wanted to have the kind of success that Ultimate Spinach had, you know? So I was playing with different cover bands, I had a pretty hot song called the Paisley Hangman.
So 60s.
But it wasn't until '74 that I hooked up with the guys that would become Thundertrain.
Well, the old folks say we can't rock and roll. We can't get no education. They said the town hall was too old. Think about that. We don't care. We're gonna find a way to knock you off your rockers. We'll blow the town away. These old folks are talking. The kids are still rocking. We got 2002 overload. Must be some sort of show. Some sort of show. Come on, alright. Hey, we're gonna raise some hell tonight. Come on, alright. Raise some hell tonight. Come on, alright. Raise some. You raise some. Gotta raise some. Some hell tonight.
Actually 72, 73 with Bobby Edwards, my drummer, who saw me playing my guitar and singing only because my real singer didn't show up to the gig. And Bobby came up after the show and said, "Man, you really rock that place. You got to come jam with my band in Medway, next town over." I said, "Yeah, I guess I could do that. I'll load up my amp." He said, "Don't bother with the amp. Don't bother with the guitars. You just come down talk to the people and sing and do what you were doing. I like how you, I had never really.
How old are you right now? Like about 18?
19.
19,
yeah.
okay.
Yep. So this was a whole new avenue that hadn't, being a front man of a band. Now, I was aware that a front man was an important thing because the last two really huge acts, and two of the hugest acts that came out of Boston, following all that Bosstown scene that was a lot of great music, but nobody really huge broke out of it nationally or internationally. But following that scene was the blues and boogie band thing that happened in Boston. Illwind, Caldwell Winfield Blues Band, the James Montgomery Band, Duke and the Drivers, and the Jay Giles Band with the incredible frontman, Wolf. And there was also a British rock and roll answer thing happening with Billy Squire had a band in the next town where my dad's business was, Wellesley, the Sidewinders. Sidewinders had a good show, but then and the Ready Teddy were coming up.
Yeah.
With a good frontman, John Morse. Paley was the frontman of Sidewinders. But then this new band I see at Lakeview Ballroom, our local dance place up the street, up Route 16, Aerosmith happens. I see them in 71, beginning of 71. Once again, big frontman. And I'm thinking, man, this frontman
They
thing,
played at my high school too.
yeah, high school.
Back in the day.
Yep. So I knew that this front man was part of the key to rock the way I like to rock. The way the Jeff Beck group with Rod Stewart in the front rocked.
Oh, yeah.
And the way the Stones rock. So I said, I understood the concept of it. I didn't know if I had the talent or the guts to do it, but I figured this is what we need. And I don't see anybody else lining up to be a lead singer. So hell, I'll do it. So I went down and sang with Bobby's band, which was called Biggie Rat. We caused a little explosion in our area. And then I hooked up, or Rick Provo of the Provo brothers of Natick, Rick and Gene. Rick saw what we were doing, and he said, I want to nab these guys for this super band that I'm putting together. That was going to become Thundertrain. Fantastic time for bands like Thundertrain and bands we would soon meet, like The Boys, Fox Pass, Willie Alexander's Boom Boom Band. 73, 74, the drinking age is going down to 18. You've got all this musical talent and all the musical ideas. You've got this new FM underground station, BCN, that has everybody linked in, plus you've got all the college radio. You've got this young kid who knows a lot about music, Oedipus, coming in and doing college radio shows and talking about new music. You've got suburban girls like my friend Linda in Holliston, who takes on a whole new everything and becomes Miss Lynn and editor of the Boston Groupie News, a fanzine that ties people together at the local. Then you've got clothing designers like Eddie Kent that was making these crazy clothes that I would wear, who would later go on to create punk creations and all this stuff that would happen in the 70s. And then you had artists. Some of the artists were guys like Frank Rowe in Classic Ruins that, he drew incredible cartoons. I was a cartoonist, not nearly as good as him. And a lot of these front men, maybe other guys too.
And Ralph Fatello from the Vinnie Band. He's
a cartoonist.
Yeah.
And guys like Ralph and Willie Alexander and Mark Thor were making their own fanzine things that they would send out to their fans, talking about where their next gig was. But they would also say, oh, and by the way, the Boys are a really cool band too. Or, Mach Bell's got something going on out in Framingham you should check out. So we were actually, I don't know if anybody was thinking back to that whole Bosstown scene or the San Francisco scene or the British invasion, but for all that we all want to be individual and come up all on our own, there is a plus to coming up as a whole group.
A critical mass of a scene is evolving.
Exactly. It was happening in New York City at the same time that it was happening in Boston in 74, 75. And then it was in 76, my band, Thundertrain, we were out in the suburbs. We were in Middlesex County playing at the high school dances that you talk about. Also trying to hook into this new concept that was everywhere at the time, which was rock bands playing at clubs for 4 or 5 nights, a stretch for a week. You'd be booked in for a week to do 4 or 5 sets a night at these big clubs. Katie's in downtown Boston.
Kenmore, yep.
You'd have the Buttercup out in Lunenburg. You'd have the Mohawk in Shirley. You'd have the Cricket Lounge in Ashland. The Black Sheep up in Newburyport, and they were everywhere. The thing was, the club owners all wanted you to come in and play some danceable rock and roll, and keep the volume down. You watch the clock. You play for 40 minutes, you get 20 minutes off. 5 sets. And they'd give you this whole.
Everything I do, I just seem to lose it. Everything I say is wrong. I can't believe it, every direction that I choose. I feel myself being weak, said I'm never strong. Frustration. Why does life treat me so unkind? Frustration. I'm about to lose my mind.
It was all covers, though, right?
But it was all
Yeah.
covers, yeah. They expected you to come and play hits by Queen and Bad Company. And this is hitting Thundertrain at a time when we had our band house, we had to make rent, we had gear, we were always trying to.
Was that the Thundertrain Mansion, as it became to be known as?
The Thundertrain Mansion, which was actually right across the street from the old location, or the only location of that carousel tent where I saw Led Zeppelin and Jimi Hendrix play. We used to go over there at night. The tent was long gone by now. By now we're talking 1975. I think the tent probably closed up in 70, 71. Because after Woodstock, Jimi Hendrix wasn't playing in tents no more. That's when the corporate rock woke up and said, hey, there's money to be made.
Oh, yeah.
And all of a sudden Van Morrison wasn't playing the Scituate Boat Club anymore. He was playing at the Boston Garden. People were waking up, business people. So that Frank Connolly had run that tent. Frank, who went on to manage Aerosmith and was the guy that brought the Beatles to Boston Garden. But once Frank Connolly and the tent left and the Thundertrain Mansion was across the street, we used to go over there to the old tent lot and dig around like archaeologists. Maybe we'll find an iron butterfly guitar pick or beginning of 76, we were primed and ready to do something other than just play these five-nighters. Oh, and the way we would get these gigs at these 5-night club gigs, we learned how to play Brown Sugar and, a Led Zeppelin
One of the
song.
worst Rolling Stone songs, if you think about it. Maybe I just heard it too much
I know
when I was a kid.
It's very incorrect today, but we learned a couple radio songs which we would go on and we'd open up with that tune, and then we would then it would turn into I'm So Excited.
Well, the moment you could see me, he could do the shade. You walked off the school, sucker on a brick. Later at the school, she walked into the park. Look real close to me, nice in the dark. When I was so excited, oh, now he was the key. When I was so
Cindy is a sleeper.
Cindy is a sleeper. She's been asleep all the day. A man or someone should wake her. I see him go and play.
Hey, I never heard any of these songs. Oh, these are all the B-sides of those Bad Company records.
No.
Beginning of 76. It was funny, you know, in Boston, I think a lot of the noise was not happening at the Rat yet. We'd played the Rat in 75, and it was a nothing room, really.
Yeah, it was just, there wasn't the Rat yet. It was just like a shithole that
Yeah.
almost nobody played. They didn't even pay you to play there, right?
No, it was just a four-waller. They'd give you the room, they did the bar, and you'd collect a buck at the door. And, you know, Red Sox fans would wander in and have another beer, or, you know, there was no vibe to it. Everybody wanted to be across the street at Katie's,
Yep.
the rock room where Daddy Warbucks and the New York Dolls and Aerosmith were all getting gigs. Across the river, only a few miles from the Rat, was the club in
Yep.
Cambridge. Now that's where 1976 was the bicentennial year. America was 200 years old. I think they called it the Bicentennial Battle. It was a bunch of the bands that would end up a year later on this one, live at the Rat. Third Rail.
Ronnie used to buy his magic from the Jersey boys. Till the Boston shot was hot, Ron took his toys. Rumbled up to Boston where fisting is pop. Till his second night in town he turned on a cop. But he's a rugged butch rider. He rushes his name. He's into heavy bones. Being masters his game. And he greases his fist. He drinks hot water. He's got a Rex original hanging cell.
The Boys.
Back in school, when I'm running my throat, I think of you. I wrote you a note. I wanna meet you, baby, by the half-past beat. When I get up, gonna knock you down on your knees. I want sex, 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 that's what I want. Sex, 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 that's what I want. Sex, 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 that's what I want.
Willie Alexander.
Down at Kent Bus Square, I saw her standing there in the rain. She took off my hat, sat down on my lap at the rain. She was my PG baby, and I don't mean maybe at the rain.
Those are three that I remember were part of that bicentennial rumble. It wasn't a rumble, it was bicentennial battle. I can't remember the actual name of it. We weren't involved, but I was hearing about it from this column in the Boston Phoenix, which was our underground weekly. James Isaacs was the writer of the Sellers by Starlight column. He was reporting on this scene of the bunch of original bands battling it out, playing original music, and it wasn't a week after Willie Alexander ended up, who had been in The Lost, one of those first wave bands I talked about, and had been in with the Bagatelle, one of the second wave bands I talked about. Now he had a third wave, and he had his own do-it-yourself single out called Mass Ave.
What a great song.
Butterfly on your right shoulder, how could you be bold? Oh, Mass. changes by the hour, really leads spot, yeah. Even the bar was the only I ate in the morning, such a fright on mess. Whoa, well, leaning on the pocket leader, thought I'd never see you all messed up. Oh, yeah.
Now, Thundertrain, we had a do-it-yourself single out called I'm So Excited. Fox Pass had a do-it-yourself out. Ready Teddy had a do-it-yourself out. This was helpful to a writer like Jimmy Isaacs because he's talking about these bands that are all...
Now, were these singles getting played on college radio, or was BCN picking them up at this point?
BCN never went with the Thundertrain single, that first one. It wasn't until the second single, I believe probably Willie got a little play, and I think Ready Teddy got good play on
Yeah, I
album
remember
issues.
Mass Ave from the radio, yeah.
Yeah. College radio, yeah. It wasn't a week later that Willie, who had won that battle, he was across the river at the Rat that Jim Harold was now managing, and he was special guest for Mickey Clean and the Mez. And they were doing, I think, every Wednesday. And Jimmy Isaacs wrote about that and said, Wednesday, you got to get to the Rat. You got to see what's going on. These guys, there's no rules. There's no, no cover songs and nothing like you've ever seen before. So I went down and, yeah, it was so cleansing. The rock radio at this point was not playing what we wanted to hear anymore. What we wanted to hear was being released. Iggy, the Dolls, Aerosmith, even Stones, they were still putting out music we wanted to hear, but it was getting pushed aside by progressive rock, softer sounds of Seals and Croft, California sounds, Eagles sounds, a whole lot of stuff, and a lot of which, I'm okay with it, but I wanted more of that hard sound that
You want rock and roll.
Isaacs was talking about in this column. So I ran down to this Rat where I'm like, I can't believe I'm going to this boring room. But with Willie and Mickey Clean on the stage, there was a whole new vibe in the room. And it incrementally started to build. After seeing Willie, I knew that I wanted to combine his energy and my energy. We were about to go into the studio to record Hot for Teacher, our second single that our guitarist, Steven Silva, had written. A guy named Earthquake Morton, who was the bass player of Duke and the Drivers, who were a very popular college and concert attraction, came down, listened to our whole song list, said, you guys have anything else? And well, we have this new song, and we played Hot for Teacher. He said, that's it. He brought us into the studio, Northern studio, recorded Hot for Teacher. That immediately went on to BCN and was getting played by Max Zann just about every day. Willie Alexander is the piano player on that Hot for Teacher.
I was going to ask you about that because I was listening to it this morning, and I was remembering, you guys don't have a piano player, and it's like there's killer piano in there, and that's Willie. I didn't realize that.
You got to pick it out. Yeah. It comes in, and when it comes in, it's awesome.
Tonight I'm staying at the school, yeah.
So we got Willie on our record, and in getting to know the man, I knew that he had a second single he wanted to get out called Hit Her With the Axe, but he didn't have the $700 he needed to have it pressed. So this is where I saw the entree of our suburban band into this Boston rock scene that was brewing. I proposed a Boomland benefit for Willie Alexander. I got Third Rail, the Boys, the Atlantics.
Wow.
We had Max and Oedipus as MCs. I remember I painted a thermometer with Willie's face up at the top of it, and we would add red ink into it as it is written. That was at the front. This one we did at the club. The Rat's the famous club in Boston, but the club was actually in many ways was a cooler venue. It had a big dance floor.
It was a much bigger club, yeah.
We were dancing back then. Had a couple good-sized bars, and then it had a little balcony area up above, too, hold another 50 people. It had the same relative capacity as the Rat. But
Did the club become a night stage? I just
Yeah,
want
I
to.
believe
Okay,
so.
yeah, okay, cool.
Yeah, so that's the same venue. But I think the club maybe lacked imagination. I mean, who names their place the club? They didn't have the imagination that Jimmy had over at the Rat. Jimmy Harold, the manager, owner of the Rat, saw what was going on and wanted more of it. After the Boomland benefit in the summer, Jimmy booked us for the last week of August at the Rat, and then it was the
And Hit Her With the Axe, by the way, that was successful because Hit Her With the Axe became a BCN radio hit.
Well, you got Thundertrain to
Yeah,
thank.
exactly.
Big ass, gonna hit her with an axe. A big ass, gonna hit her with an axe. Oh, gonna lay some pipe tonight, gonna do it right. Lay some pipe tonight, gonna do it all night. They call me the plumber, I'm an undercover man. Oh, they call me the plumber, I'm an undercover man. Yes, I say I roll over, hit her with an axe. Roll over, hit her with an axe.
You know, it was the very next week after, this is how fast things were happening. The very week after we played our first Rat gig at what was going to become the Rat, the Jimmy Harold Rat, not the old Boston Red Sox Refugees Center. The very next month, the end of September, is when we started to record live at the Rat. And that was those same bands I was just talking about. Willie Alexander, Third Rail, The Real Kids, also from Natick.
Everywhere I go, I hear kids talking. There's nothing going on. The town ain't rocking like it did before. Hey, back in '64, when we were rocking with the ramrods, when we were shaking with the pandas, and it don't seem the same without the remains. Well, I don't want no more excuses. I just wanna see you on the street tonight. I just wanna dance and hold you tight. Nobody else will do. Oh, baby, now.
Susan.
Even if it sounds so perfect, child, honey, don't believe it's true. 'Cause I still have to pay in a subtle way, something you will never understand.
Mark Thor.
LA International Airport. I've been up here for hours now. I've seen the movie 10 times. I've had 6 whiskey sours. And she says coffee and tea. She can't be talking to me. Somebody send her away. Let's start circling LA now.
I think Mark was also on that Boomland benefit with us. Sass?
Rockin' in the USA. Crazy ways out here to stay. And I know it feels so fun. Spending all our time. Rockin' in the USA. Hey, Russia, we got it all on you. Another poor boy gone bad. What am I supposed to be? You can't make one mistake and rock away the misery. And I know it feels so fun, spending all my time rocking in the USA. Hey, hey, yeah,
The Inflictors.
yeah, I miss you. I'm longing for you. I love to kiss you, but you're not in you. This ought to get to me. This really gonna get to me. Da da dolly, da da dolly, da da dolly. Yeah.
And Billy Connor's band, The Boys.
There's a girl who lives on my street. When I see her, my heart skips a beat. She's only 15, I don't know her name. Every time I see her, I go insane. And I don't know what's wrong with me. This happens with every girl I see. All it takes is one little smile. I got her a wink, and I go wild. It's so easy to fall in love. Easy to fall in love. Easy to fall in love.
These 10 bands come together. We had a fantastic week recording the album. And then it was a pretty long wait.
What
3 or
song?
4 months.
Can I interrupt? What song did you guys play when you played on Live at the Rat?
The closing song on the album, I Gotta Rock, which is spelled wrong on the record. It's spelled like a third grade grammar teacher corrected, because it's I Gotta Rock, Gotta, I Gotta Rock, and that's just I've got to rock. It says in the
That sounds like the upper crust. I've got to rock.
And we did a live version of our first single, I'm So Excited.
You get me so excited. Well, the moment you can see me, the people do the shade. You walk off the school, sucker on a strip. Hey, at the school, you walk into the park. Look real close to me, the face in the jar. When I was so excited, oh, when I get to see you. When I was so excited, I had no knowledge to do. When I was so excited, when I get to see you. So excited, so excited.
Those are our two songs. Just about everybody did two songs. It's a two-album
great album.
deal. Yeah, it was a really good album, and we got a lot out of it. The recording was amazing. The release was amazing because we kind of recreated it on the stage of the Rat, which a lot happened in the 4 months between recording and releasing the album. Suddenly, bands like the Ramones, the Runaways, Blondie, New York and LA bands want to come to this Rat. They're hearing about it. Jimmy was smart. CBGB's, the big New York club, and Max's had both put out their own compilation records, live at CBGB's. He said, let's do live at the Rat. And you know what followed? Press. Playboy wrote about it. New York Times wrote about it. Of course, the Boston Globe, the Phoenix. They're all over this. And the 10 bands involved. Before you can have the Ramones play at the Rat, we had to build the stage bigger, which meant decreasing the size of the dance floor. Everybody used to dance, believe it or not.
I was watching, so I was looking at a one that you guys did. It was Reading, Writing, Rock and Roll. And by the way, if you can find it on YouTube, if you're listening, it's great. And but what I notice is the amount of women on the floor dancing. There's two very prominent, very attractive blonde girls dancing up front, and the whole dance floor is packed. And I'm there like, that's not my experience from like when it switched over to punk. There was not a dancing thing, but it was a dancing thing back then. So, yeah.
Yeah, and it was a lot of girls. What I've saw through the punk years into the harder it got, the less girls I saw, and it changed.
Unnatural Acts guys will tell you that, that they frighten them away, like Richie and Tommy told us that. So they said they were all strictly boys, and I saw them quite frequently, and I can attest that was the truth.
Well, I don't know if Unnatural Acts scared anybody away.
They didn't scare them. It was all guys that showed up. It was very much boy-based rock and roll.
Right. And meanwhile, bands like Ready Teddy and Thundertrain, we were gearing ourselves towards trying to get those young girls into the place. And when the drinking age was 18, it was young girls in the place.
Because that's going to attract boys who drink even more.
Exactly. That's what and the dance floor was fun because you could sit there, and if you didn't want to just look at me singing, who wants to do that? You could look at those two blonde girls dancing, I thought it was great. And I liked to dance myself. And I used to go out to see Ready Teddy and Willie on any night that I didn't have to play myself, and I immediately would be on the dance floor.
Yep.
Which I don't know if every rock band guy is like that. I know that my lead guitarist, Steven Silva, is definitely not like that. He was a more on the side of the stage, that guitarist doesn't know what he's doing. And I'd be like, yeah, he doesn't know what he's doing. He only knows 3 chords, and he learned to play last week, and he's killing it.
Yeah.
No, I don't like this punk, So there was a division starting to happen. I understood what Steven was saying intellectually, but I was like, dude, open your eyes and don't think about it, Get out on the dance floor and dance with a girl while he plays that riff, and maybe you'll understand it. But nah, he wasn't dancing. So the dance floor goes away, the stage gets bigger. Suddenly the Rat is bringing in these bigger acts. We were opening up for the Runaways, the famous
I was
night.
at that show.
They played, I think it was 3 nights. One night Ready
I was
Teddy
at one of the
opened.
shows, yeah.
Real
Pretty sure
Kids
it was-
opened
yes.
one night. The third and last night was the night that Thundertrain opened, and that was the night that a bunch of people weren't there because they were across the river at the Harvard Square Theater to see Iggy. And after Iggy's show ended, he came over, he wanted to see the Rat. And he brought along his keyboard player producer, David Bowie. They both came down to the Rat as we're finishing up our set. And the party that night up in Jim Harold's office was one of the most spectacular things I'd ever been to. I wish I could remember more about it, but, it was, the Runaways, of course, had all the future girl, Lita Ford, Joan Jett, Sherry Curry. David Bowie was drawing a certain amount of interest, being live at the Rat. He didn't get up and sing or anything. And he was dressed down, just wearing a plaid shirt, a slender, quiet British chap. But, yeah, we all had Chinese food up in Jim's office and drank White Russians, which was Jim's favorite at that time. A couple weeks after that gig, Live at the Rat was released. And at the same time Live at the Rat was released, Thundertrain released this one. Sorry, I just hit the mic. Teenage Suicide, it was called. This was a collection of songs written by Steven and our other guitarist, Gene Provo, Cool Gene. Hot for Teacher, Modern Girls.
Modern girls! Mary, Mary, you're quite contrary. You close your door, you don't answer the phone. You leave me standing out in the cold, but somehow I know
Hell Tonight by Gene, Frustration by Steven, I Gotta Rock, which Steven and I wrote. That was kind of became our calling card, I Gotta Rock. And so we took the whole group of 10 bands from the Rat, and we all went to New York together. And we played CBGB's for a week together. What a... the Shirts, Annie Golden's band from Brooklyn, were playing the Rat that week with the Cars. So we all went to New York, and most of us lived in Annie Golden and the Shirts. It was 3 or 4 story. It looked like the house that the honeymooners lived in.
Oh, God.
Crammed. Yeah, I just remember going back and forth from Brooklyn to the Seabees we were there for 4 or 5 nights in a row, and it was just a spectacular time. Son of Sam was running loose in the streets of New York, and New York was kind of a Desolation Boulevard kind of place at the time, you know. It was before everything got Disney-fied.
Yeah, I was going to say, it was more of a filthy place back then.
It was filthy. You know, for a bunch of 22-year-old guys, we were like, really? A live sex show for 99 cents? You know, I think I can dig up that change. You know, we were all over the place. And all the record company guys were there to see us. The actual vice presidents and presidents of the labels, Seymour Stein from Sire, and Robert Fiden from Arista, and there was a whole bunch of them. Danny Fields from 16 Magazine and the manager of the Ramones, of course, big proponent of the Boston rock scene. Some of the cast of Saturday Night Live, which was the new big hit TV show, were there.
But this is still, I mean, I just want to reset the era. So I know the Ramones have come out by now, but this is all pre-punk. I mean, I don't, you know, if you talk to like JJ from DMZ, he'll say like, oh no, we were never punk. You know, we were just rock and roll. And you guys was really, really just American rock and roll. I think I heard you describe it as before. And it's like, it's a pre-punk time. What is this, 76, right? 76, maybe early 77?
Yeah.
So the Talking Heads haven't released that album yet either.
Right,
so.
76. The Ramones had visited Boston in 76, so we had seen it. I'm not sure when the first album hit.
Yep.
A lot was happening in a very focused, like I say, you know, I was introduced to the scene of these bands in the beginning of 76, and then by September of that same year, I'm recording an album with them all. And then within months, we're all in New York playing together at CB's, and DMZ gets a deal out of it. Willie Alexander gets a deal out of it. The Real Kids get a deal out of it. So it was a heady time, you know, it was really exciting. Back here, the college radio was in total support, and even old BCN was playing our stuff too. So it was a spectacular moment. For Thundertrain, we had started doing a bunch of gigs with the Dead Boys, also at this same time. It was just before that Runaways gig that I told you about, that the Dead Boys first came to Boston. They were out on a fishing expedition. They're from Ohio. They came to New York City and to the Rat to see what this scene was that they'd been hearing about. They found both areas receptive to what they were doing, so within months they were back to Boston again, once again with Thundertrain. And then we started going to New York to play on Dead Boys bills. The Dead Boys were the canary in the coal mine that I got to see what was coming. Like in the canary in the coal mine, you know, the canary dies, and then you know you're going to be next. When I met the Dead Boys, they looked like my band. A bunch of skinny guys, long hair, you know, trying to look like girls. The next time I saw the Dead Boys still, but then in April, we're talking 2, 3, 8 weeks later, the Dead Boys come to Boston. We show up in our usual scarves, long hair, and boots. They show up, their hair's totally buzz-cutted or, little Twinkies coming up. A bone through their nose and a dog collar around and a ripped T-shirt and spitting and, cuts on their arm without a Band-Aid. Not what we do in New England.
Punk in air quotes. Punk in air, yeah.
Don't need no human rights. I got some news for you. Don't even need you to. I got my damn machine. Got my electronic dream. Sonic producer, ain't no loser. Got my sonic producer, ain't no loser.
And back, I had the band, the Dead Boys, staying at my parents' house. My parents were away at their place up in Maine, and Stiv opens up this little thing, and he shows me these singles on this weird label called Stiff. He shows me this ridiculous looking, unhealthy looking guy leaning over with glasses and says Elvis Costello, and I'm laughing. I said, "This is Elvis." Elvis had only died. That was in '76.
Yeah.
And this guy is Elvis. Come on, what's this
The new
crap?
Elvis.
And then he takes out this thing called Anarchy in the UK. And I look at the picture of the guys on it with this bizarre name, Sex Pistols, but they all look like Stiv and his guys. And Stiv looks at me and says, "This is what we're going to do." And I'm like, whoa. So
What's really funny about this story? 'Cause I've heard this story from JJ from DMZ too, and he said same thing. The DMZ shows up, long haired, sort of like post hippie stuff. Even though you guys don't like hippies that much, but because you're in there, it's more glam stuff. Yeah, I mean, you guys were more glam than say DMZ in them, and even Ready Teddy in them. But you were way. I want to go back to that in a few minutes, but then all of a sudden it's like. It's like you think of punk as being these guys who were this we're just punks, but it was a marketing gig, and it's like this is the future, this is what we're gonna do. I go, what about being yourselves? I mean, I think JJ sort of was laughing about that too, but this is where it's headed, and it's like, yeah, but is it really you? I don't know. I thought that was kind of considering that the Dead Boys is so iconic,
Yeah, well, Stiv Bators had a sharp business mind, and all the Dead Boys, just about all of them were, especially Jimmy Zero and Stiv. I mean, you could really have a quiet conversation with these guys.
They knew what they were doing.
They knew what they're doing, not only in rock, but they could talk about broad subject matter, and they were articulate guys. Yeah. So there is that. But on the other hand, once they adopted that look, they sure did look comfortable in it, and it fit their songs and their whole thing. So I don't want to jump down their throat for what they did, because, I mean, the change in me from when I first saw Brian Jones and the Rolling Stones from the summer before,
Yeah.
You do a few things, and all of a sudden
that puts it in much better context then. Yeah. But before we go any further, I want to back up. So, because now we're getting to the part when it's getting ready to change. In the meantime, I really want to talk more about Thundertrain. Now, you guys, when you came up, and this is 1974 when you played your first gig, so you guys are totally. It's very. I think you heard you describe one time as sort of a glitter rock, and then glam. And then, but the kind of music that you're playing is just unbridled, kind of muscular, kind of all about chicks and rock and roll, and that's it, And it's but it's totally, totally committed to what you're doing, and you're nuts on stage. And it's I mean, as good as the record is, watching you guys live was really, really fun. But you also get the glam thing going on. I saw this one. this one video, and I'm looking, and it's like, I think you have no shirt on, and then you've got the two guitarists have like, their shirts undone all the way down, and they're like the long hair and everything else. And so why don't you talk about that and talk about like where the music came from and what kind of music you guys were playing for the people that haven't had a chance to listen to the records yet, because it's like it was some pretty great rock and roll. So
Yeah, well, I think we certainly had great influences from a lot of those Boston bands that I talked about, and certainly the bands that the Boston bands were listening to: the Yardbirds, the Stones, Fleetwood Mac, Peter Green's Fleetwood Mac, the Who. That was all interesting to us. And then when I saw that Dolls album come out in '71, I spent a long time with that record cover looking at it. And, there were things about it. I was like, I would never do that. But then why can't I stop looking at this record cover? And it was fascinating.
that's the black and white cover, right?
Yeah, the black and white one.
And they look like abused women, abused hookers doing heroin.
I hitchhiked after there was a minute between Biggie Rat and when I started with Thundertrain in the beginning of spring of '73. I hitchhiked across America for my third time. I started hitchhiking to West Coast when I was 16. I hitchhiked out, and I wanted to see the Sunset Strip. I'd heard about Rodney Bingenheimer's English disco, and I'd heard about the Rainbow and this whole Sunset Strip scene. So I went out there. It was eye-opening and a learning experience. Bands like The Sweet, bands like Silverhead, Mott the Hoople, Bowie, of course, the rebel era of his stuff. The Dolls would come out there. The music I was familiar with, but then the street scene there, seeing everybody tottering around on their heels and wearing their boas, and the way they were wearing their hair, and the way the boys and the girls related to one another. I lived in that scene for, not all that long. 2 or 3 weeks I was hanging out in that whole L.A. glitter scene, and I said, man, I would like to bring this back to Boston. I just love this. I can't even put it into words what it all was, but it was very freeing and exciting, and it was so showy, and it just belonged. I mean, we were doing it out on the sidewalks. It was happening all over the place on the Strip. I wanted to bring it home. And I found kindred spirits in Rick and Gene Provo, and Steven Silva went along with it to a point anyway. Definitely would teeter around on the heels, and the girls loved Steven. He had a look that the girls loved. So yeah, that's what the beginning of Thundertrain was. We were very much, and we began the show with a Silverhead song, and we ended the show with a Silverhead song.
And what was that? What was the Silverhead song?
Silverhead had one that we opened called "Hello New York." Oh yeah, this is when we started. We first got Thundertrain together in the summer of '74 in the basement of Jack's Drum Shop here in Boylston Street. Rick said, "We're not from Natick. We're direct from New York City." So we were direct from New York City. Our first gig at Wellesley High School, direct from New York City, Thundertrain, and there's a picture of us. And it's like, aren't those the guys that played at the Teen Center 8 weeks ago? Yeah, but they're good. Let's go see them. So yeah, we opened with "Hello New York."
Fire in
same band, Silverhead, had a song called Bright Light that we would end the show with. And there was a minute in time, a lot of the club bands back then had got into flash powder. You ever see a band that used flash powder?
No.
It's a magician's thing, you know, when he goes presto and then a fire comes and a dove flies out. Well, you could buy this flash powder at a theatrical, and you're supposed to only use a tiny amount to make a dove appear. But if you put it, you make a little wooden box or strong wooden box, 2x4s, and you pour this powder in, and you put 2 filaments in, and you attach them to a battery, and boom, you get this monster flash.
Oh, I just remember seeing that on Spinal Tap or something.
Yeah. So that's what that's how you achieve the effect. And this Silverhead song was perfect because it's like I do da da do, I do do do, and bright light. And when I hit it, bright light, and everybody in the club is blinded at that point. It's like Day of the Triffids. Nobody can see for like 10 minutes, and the whole place is full of smoke. But you do it at the end of the night, and it helps clear the people out of the bar. Everybody's run.
They put ammonia on the floors of the bars that I used to drink in to clear people out. So
The problem is you continually experiment with more and more flash powder. And we had some bad things happen with that, but yeah. So we were a glitter rock, Unchained and Shameless. It was startling, and those videos that you saw are good, but I swear we were toned down. We were trying. Okay, I'll plead guilty. If Stiv was trying to fit in with what the Pistols were doing, I was trying to fit our suburban rock act into what guys like Mark Thor and Third Rail, which had this very kind of a druggy chic, cool look going on. You know,
the Inflictors were like that too, right?
Yeah, it was more like a Velvet Underground groove, and that's cool. It's definitely not what we were doing. We were a bunch of glitter rockers twisting around, So I'm like, we've got to, can we tone this somehow? Can we fit this more so it somehow dovetails? And I guess we did. The people that came to see bands like Runaways or Dead Boys certainly liked to see what we did. Dictators were another band we played with from New York they were like Thundertrain. They rocked hard. The dangerous element that they brought into their band, the Dictators, that was the dangerous element that I bring in was humor. I always found a little bit of humor in the rock.
Yep.
I liked Rod Stewart with the Faces and Jeff Beck. He had a smile on his face and a wink, He wasn't taking himself and the whole thing too seriously. But you got to be careful because rock fans, Motorhead, damn it. I don't want any jokes. Motorhead, they are rock fans, and so you got to be careful where you inject humor. And the Dictators.
That's where punk really started. I mean, the Boston punk scene. When I think about like Frank Rowe from Classic Ruins, and the guys from Unnatural Acts. I mean, they're just goofy kids telling funny stories with 3 chords.
Yes. I love that.
But you guys were something different though. You guys were like, so for people who haven't heard Thundertrain, actually, let's talk about some of the influence and some of the bands. I know this is always dangerous, but like the bands you just sort of sounded like. And when Lenny and I had a conversation a while ago, and we were talking about like maybe a little Thin Lizzy, maybe a little. But I also thought about if some of the hair bands didn't suck. I mean, you guys were like what. Those guys made the money and the fame, but you guys were actually much better. I could have sworn that I thought of Twisted Sister the other day because they're like a couple of songs and they're like, this is like a good version of Twisted Sister. Not that Twisted Sister totally sucked. I mean, I got a kick out of them, but it's like, so why don't you try to explain what the sound was like? Because it's like it's really raw. It's totally insane, and like I said, it's about chicks and rock and roll. That's about it. But it's really, really fun.
It's insane and it's raw, but there's underpinnings. We did have a ferocious drummer who did
yeah.
amazing things that, drummers were in awe of what Bobby could do, just with technical things, speed and on that foot pedal. This is before guys, nowadays guys have 2 kick drum pedals attached to one kick. Bobby was doing everything with one kick drum pedal, and he just was lightning, like a John Bonham on the foot, And then our lead guitarist, Steven, was very much out of the rock star guitarist playbook, and he spent all his time practicing and working on his licks. And so
You can tell.
so with Steven and Bobby, you're going in, if you're a kid wanting to rock, and it was, 101 rock and roll, you were watching, you could really learn something watching these guys, or be inspired to go home and practice. So you had some real meat on the rock and roll there. And then the Provo brothers were genius in their simplicity and their drive, and they were the thunder of the Thundertrain. Our songs were not 3-chord. Even our songs that you listen to Hot for Teacher and you go, oh, that's a 3-chord Chuck Berry song. But once you start to actually try to play along with it, you're like, damn, there's a lot of other chords in here.
And Steve Silver really is a killer guitarist.
If you try to play-
if you like guitar,
Yeah.
Steve Silver's a great guitarist.
The lead that Steven put down on that record is, it's incredible. So you had real musicality. Sometimes people didn't notice it because I was so busy out front, just the sky was the limit for
You
me.
were totally nuts, yeah.
Totally nuts. If there was a basketball hoop or a pipe or something I could hang on like a monkey, I was up there monkeying. When I wasn't there, I was down on the dance floor groveling around and climbing on top of people. I was all over the room, and I said what was on my mind. Some of our greatest shows were out in the sticks, because we would go from playing Max's Kansas City, and then all of a sudden you're back in Berlin, Vermont, at some place where nobody knows who you are, and everybody just wants to hear Queen and Bad Company, and you're there going, damn, we've got a couple of albums out right now. We just came from New York City. We got all this great stuff. You guys don't want to hear it. Club owner, play some danceable rock, damn it. And I would just start going after these club owners straight from the stage. And everybody in the club that was not playing along, man, I would just go after them. It was, like...
You're lucky you didn't get your ass kicked. I mean, between that, if you're ever in the burbs and you've got the glam look and you're going after people, it's like, how did you not get your ass kicked?
Well, I got stories about that, too. But part of it was, I think I tried to do it in a Don Rickles way.
Oh, yeah.
Where I was ripping people apart, but... Is that guy serious or not? Should we kick his ass? Or maybe, it was kind of funny the way he said it. I had Rick Provo, who was the only tall guy in the band that I could hide behind whenever, I often did go too far, and I avoided getting, my teeth kicked in, but I didn't have a filter. Which, that worked great as far as putting on crazy-ass rock shows and making music, but it's, it can be dangerous.
If you want to see a clip of what Mach looks like when he's just riffing, go to YouTube and put on Disco Sniper. It's just like a riff on how much disco sucks, but it's also it's good. It's a good song, but it's also just him. It's sort of like I don't know if you were on speed or not, but it's like it just was really, really just like just this totally insane riff with good rock and roll going on in the background.
Yeah. The Disco Sniper evolved out of that song "I Gotta Rock."
Yeah.
I've got to rock, which, originally is just a rock song with a short rap in the middle of it, kind of a la Peter Wolf when he used to talk about, things in the middle of a song.
Yep.
And you get back to the song. But then that rap grew and grew. And in 77, 78, the Disco Sucks thing was something that.
Yep.
It's funny, you mentioned Twisted Sister. They were doing the same act down in New Jersey and Connecticut. We first ran into them when we very first started Thundertrain. They were doing the same thing. We were down in Newport, Rhode Island, about to play at this 5-night rock club called the Electric Elephant, and and the band playing was Twisted Sister, and it was the same Twisted Sister that would end up being on MTV 10, 12 years later. But they were doing Rebel Rebel by Bowie and the Brown Sugar, They were doing the same thing that Thundertrain was doing at that point. Although they were doing it a lot better than us. We're like, damn, we're going to be in this club next week doing the same tunes, and these guys sound better. But I found out later that, they seized on that Disco Sucks thing. I'll admit it was kind of it's an easy way to get a crowd going when you pick on something. I mean, it's like saying Yankees suck in front of a Red Sox. Everybody said, yeah. Well, that was an easy way to get a cheer. Saying Disco Sucks in a rock club was an easy way to get people excited.
Yeah,
and
it's an easy laugh.
But I took it a few steps too far. Next thing you know, the Disco Sniper was up on top of Lucifer's, taking aim at people in Kenmore Square. The kind of I had no filter.
And I want to be the Disco Sniper! Celebrations right across the street! And it's because of those idiots, those wimps, those shitty people. But we gotta listen to that crap. All those little disco babies. They wanna hear that shit. I'm gonna give out 357 Magnum with a telescopic scope. I wanna pick them off from the top of the rack. I wanna blow their heads off. Cause you know what sucks? You know what sucks? Disco sucks. 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 Disco sucks.
Yeah, but you know what? Like I said, you got to watch some of the live stuff on YouTube. It's really funny. You're really a very engaging singer. So yeah, I just wanted to make sure that I wanted to paint a picture for people to what you guys looked and sounded like, and we talk a little more about like influences. Like I said, I think you and I had talked before about how writers and people trying to describe it, always trying to say like, yeah, they're kind of like so and so, and that really didn't really necessarily sound really like anybody. But like I said, Lenny and I were trying to figure out like, okay, who do they sound like? Okay, what are they like? And it's like, in finding that like that something that you could convey to someone else. Like, well, if you like this band, then you'll definitely like this band. So.
Well, that's one of the reasons we didn't break through, I think. My dad's a businessman as we began this, and he used to, I'd say, geez, I can't get my band signed. And my father said, well, listen, I know you never went to business school, or any school for that matter, but let me ask you something. If you went to a record company and were going to describe what your band was in a sentence, what would you say? And I'd go, well, I don't know, we're kind of a younger Rolling Stones, I guess. He says, that describes just about every band in America, except for the ones that aren't young Beatles. But yeah, you're right. Because you tune into certain parts of our albums, and it sounds like some southern rock band off on a tangent. Stevens playing the Bottleneck rip and slide, and the band's
Like
cranking.
a Wishbone
and
Ash thing we were talking
the
about
Wishbone
before,
Ash
yeah.
thing, you know. And sometimes I'm singing, and then it's, oh, and there's Jim Dandy. Now it's like Black Oak, Arkansas. But
I had that album.
you know, but then we'll start talking about, you know, frustration and suicide and some street scene, and you go, wow, this is more like they're like the New York Dolls, and, you know, that guy's wearing eyeliner, and, you know, they're like Exile on Main Street or something like that. I don't know, it was all over the place. People didn't know exactly what to make of it. And I think people were nervous, you know, this band is great, but look out for Mach Bell, because he might suddenly go nuts and
Snap.
then, you know, he'll start tweeting nasty stuff about you, so look out. We were hard to contain.
So it's like a branding issue, you know? It's like, I mean, that's what they would call it now. They wouldn't have called that in the 70s, but it's like, you know, maybe you should have talked to Steve Baters. I mean, you know,
Yeah.
they picked a direction and they said, okay, this is what we're going to do. And then, you know.
Yeah, and if you could describe Thundertrain in words, people would say, what you're describing kind of sounds like Aerosmith, maybe? You know, because Aerosmith, there's Doll's influence. There's, you know, there's a little glitter glam in their beginnings. Yep. You know, but they can rock hard like a classic rock band. And so that slot in the wheel had kind of been filled a bit by...
You guys, and a lot of, I mean, like, I think that's really a key point, is that when I listen to Teenage Suicide, it really is all over the map. Because, you know, that's what happens when you've got, you know, multiple good songwriters. You said, you know, who were the two songwriters? You said
Yeah.
Steve Silver and who's the
Yeah,
other guy?
Steven Silva and
Gene,
Provo. Yeah, Gene Provo. Yeah, we had the songwriters. It just wasn't the... If radio... If we were in a place where radio was when they were with the British invasion, when they couldn't get enough Beatles, so they would hire, you know, everybody that kind of fit that bill.
Badfinger.
Badfinger. Well, I'm thinking more back, you know, with the Honeycombs and the Nashville Teens and all these
yeah.
other bands that would be on a Beatles show in '64. But radio, there was hard rock was only getting a little tiny bit of the bandwidth on FM radio at the time.
Yep.
You know, to listen to classic rock radio today, you would think, man, back in the 70s must have just been rock, 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 rock. But back in the 70s, it wasn't so much on the FM dial. Not in this town anyway. Once I'm thinking about COZ and BCN
Yep.
and AAF, the giants. There was some rock, but there was a whole lot of other stuff. And then once we move ahead the window from 77 to 78, when the Cars and the Police start hitting the scene, then a whole new window opens up, which makes even tighter for the rock acts. Now,
New Wave, you mean?
Now new wave, synthesizers, reggae, what do they call that? Those stiff bands with the black and white, Madness. I can't think of that type of
like Devo and
ska.
Oh yeah.
You know, you
okay.
had the ska and the oi bands, and you know, there's all this stuff is suddenly coming in. So, for my band Thundertrain, somebody told me, I bought a book when I was a kid, how to be in a rock band, and it said, you got 3 years. It says, 3 years in, you're going to know if you're going to make it, you know, but 3 years, things should be happening. Well, we started Thundertrain in 74, and in 77, we were in New York City getting written up, and we had our albums out, and I was like, it's just like the book said.
Yeah.
We're 3 years in, and it's happening. But then a bunch of the Rat bands did get signed. But then so did suddenly Boston comes out of nowhere. Where are these guys? They never played any clubs. They say they're just another band out of Boston.
That was a total studio creation.
But it was but whoa, that spun our head around. And then the Cars, who, you know, and I'd got to know Elliot, and I knew David, the drummer from DMZ, and I'd talked a lot with Rick Ocasek. He wanted to get involved in our Rat scene, and he was trying to figure out how he could he'd watched Thundertrain turn into a pretzel to be able to fit into it. So how can his band Captain Swing turn into a pretzel and fit into this scene? So all these bands are coming in, and my rift with Steven continued, where there was, we had differences. He never forgave me for marrying us too tightly with this punk rock kind of crowd and scene and all that.
Because he was a rocker and he didn't like the way the scene was starting to grow.
He also, he never was sure about this DIY record stuff. He said, well, he says, let's not put out any of this stuff. Hold on to it until, we get that big deal from, Atlantic, and then you release it. Be like a regular band, like, 10 years after and Iron Butterfly.
Ask the Neighborhoods how that worked out.
I hope that today he's really, happy when he sees these old CDs of Thundertrain and stuff that we put out and did, and is glad that we did it. Because too many really great suburban rock bands, they had their time, had fans, more fans probably than Thundertrain, probably made a lot more money because they could play all those songs the club owners wanted to hear.
Yeah.
But, there's nothing really left behind.
Yeah. So let's talk a little bit about so you guys the scene is changing, and you and Steven are starting to have some issues. You want to talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, well, for instance, our album, Teenage Suicide.
Can you tell me a little bit, because Teenage Suicide is really interesting, particularly for those, it's like pre-punk, so it's like Teenage Suicide's a pretty radical name.
Yeah, definitely. In 76, we'd released Hot for Teacher, the single. That was doing great for us. It was released by Earthquake Morton's label, Jelly. Earthquake comes up to me and says, we're getting played all over Boston and it's moving into some other markets. Let's put out an album. I said, that sounds great. And we booked into the studio, a midnight session, and we just played live in the studio to 2-track, which means you just mic everybody up. You get the levels where you think they should be, like a mixer in a club would do. And then you play, and it goes to tape, and it's frozen there. There's no like a slide or say, it's great, except Mach's voice should be louder, so let's turn it up. It was just done, and you couldn't change it. That's what live to 2-track is, as opposed to the Hot for Teacher single with Willie on piano. That was done on a 16-track.
Yep.
Expensive. It took us 3 days to record that. We go in and we record this whole other bunch of stuff, which Steven and the rest of the band we were just demoing songs to see what would work for an album. So we recorded, 8 more songs. Earthquake, after listening to the tapes a few times, says, listen, I can make a deal with Gem Records. Gem Records was the import distributor. It used to be in the record stores for us guys that couldn't get enough Who and Jeff Beck songs because they didn't release all the songs on the American labels. You'd go into the back of the record store and they'd have the import bins. That's where you'd get the Who doing I'm a Boy and Jeff Beck doing Tally Man. And these songs that we'd read about in the press, British press, but the American labels didn't put out. So Gem would go to England. They would buy records. They would resell them to us kids here in America. Now Gem was making a deal came to Earthy and said, we will release this Thundertrain because we've been selling it in our bins as an import. People don't know what the heck it is.
Yeah.
This is the single, but it fits in with this weird stuff that we sell from Europe. So if you guys will do an album, we'll do a big pre-order. So Earthy comes back to me. Let's just release that stuff you guys just did. I go,
The 2-track.
The 2-track. I go, well, I don't know, the band might freak out. I listened to it, I said, yeah, it's pretty good, it rocks. Sounds like we do live. And I'd sure like to jump on this deal while it's being offered, because if we don't jump on it, they'll probably be offering it to DMZ tomorrow as soon as they find out about that band. So I conned the band into going along with it was kind of what we were doing was kind of like what they used to do with the records in the early 60s and the 50s you'd hear about,
Oh, geez, yeah.
It'd be a hit single with a bunch of stuff hitched to it. I won't say junk because, it was good songs, but they weren't realized probably to where the writers had imagined it being. They wanted it to sound like a Kiss record or an Aerosmith record, and it sounds like a Jelly record. And anyway, once I sold the whole idea of it, then I said, what are we going to call it and what are we going to do? And another band that was a big influence on Thundertrain from the beginning was Alice Cooper.
Yep. Especially the early Alice Cooper.
The
right?
early Alice
Yeah.
Cooper, the Guillotine, the Electric Chair, the $1 Billion Babies. And shock rock, I was thinking, what can we do to be really shocking? I knew, our following was underage teenage girls. Anyway, these girls, would always be telling us about the problem they had. Their parents didn't want them coming out to see Thundertrain, or frustrated because they are too young to get a job or too old to do what they used to do. Frustrated kids all around us. And I'm thinking about frustration, and I'm thinking about tension, and I'm thinking about Alice Cooper, and I'm thinking teenage suicide. Now, there's two words you've never heard together.
Not then.
I'd hardly ever heard the word suicide. It was kind of a dirty word. If you had an aunt that died from suicide, it was not mentioned, and there was something else.
It was immoral.
So, okay, this is good. It's almost like a dirty word,
Yeah.
but it's a legal word. So, teenage suicide. And then we came up with this concept. It's hard to see it here, but if you study the album cover, there's a girl. She's scrawled Thundertrain on her mirror of her dresser, and now, if you look carefully on the corner of the album cover, she's slit her wrist and she's bleeding out, and she's dying on the front of the album cover in reverse in the mirror. Now that's a cool idea.
Oh, God.
And we got Oedipus, the DJ, took the photo. My girlfriend Anne Marie did the theatrical makeup of the suicide. And we released Teenage Suicide. Yahoo!
What a totally, for like that time, what a totally shocking. Even Alice Cooper didn't do anything that sick.
No, I know. Yeah, we went, yeah. No, yeah, the filter was off. We went too far. Strangely enough, 16 was into Thundertrain. They had me first, Meet Mach, and my picture, but then they had the whole band, and they hyped this and get their new record, Teenage Suicide.
16 magazine?
In 16
The teenage girl magazine?
Yes.
Holy shit.
It said Teenage Suicide. So,
Oh, God.
oh, God.
That's hilarious.
So anyway, so there was always an underlying, and then Jem went with it, and it did well, and it's a famous record now for many record collectors and people who fascinated with this particular era.
It's uneven and raw, but it's really good. That's how I would describe it
Yeah.
when I was telling my friends,
David Frick, the senior editor of Rolling Stone, 25 years later, when it was re-released as a CD, here's the little CD version. When it was re-released, David Frick said we were the godfather of Appetite for Destruction and Guns N' Roses.
Oh, yeah.
He said, this is the blueprint of that band. I don't know if I'd go that far, but anyway, that was our place. I don't know if Stephen has ever forgiven me for conning everybody into releasing those half-done songs as an album, but
Instead of getting a producer and cleaning it up and getting somebody who worked with,
Yeah.
one of the MTV hair bands. And
Which-
they might have sucked the life out of you, too, like they did like the Nervous Eaters and DMZ and a bunch of other people. So you don't know, but...
True. Yeah, no, nobody knows. Yeah, and they even sucked the life out of the first Aerosmith and Kiss records. Don't
John
really,
Butcher.
Yeah, they, it's hard to capture a live band. It's very hard. So that all brought us to where we were in the end of the decade. Now Thundertrain's almost 5 years old. We're still working a lot. Colleges, high schools, clubs. They were hiring us, but like I said, the Boston scene had turned into now bands like Boston, New England, there were other new
Kind
all
of
these-
soulless. I mean, I always think of Boston and New England as being like, I mean, technically they're fine, but they're not like rock and roll to me.
Yeah, well, it definitely wasn't what we were peddling. So Thundertrain, what happened, 1979, 80 was another of those moments. Led Zeppelin threw in the towel. I guess John Bonham had passed away by then, so it was time. Joe Perry left Aerosmith to be followed by Brad Whitford. Bands, all these bands, all these guys like Leslie West and Johnny Winter and Rick Derringer, who had been, rocking through the 70s, suddenly were being called dinosaurs. And I don't think it was
I
just
saw Leslie West at the Rat, though.
yeah. It wasn't just because they were all pushing 30 either. It was just that it seemed like we've been listening to that music forever. And it's time for a new sound. And a whole new wave came in. So so Thundertrain ended. Steven left. The other four of us continued. First we called ourselves the Hits. And we played the first Boston Rumble at the Rat in '79 as the Hits. But the Rumble's fixed, so
Oh,
we
yeah.
didn't win.
God. Rock and roll people.
Then it got even smaller. Cool Gene got married and left the band, and then now it was just Rick and Bobby and I as a power trio, and I started playing guitar again, and we were the Mag Four. And I had scoped down on my rock and roll dreams. I was no longer saying I'm going to conquer the world and become the new, John Lennon. It's going to be, I love to play. We'll do a gig at the Paradise or the Rat if the phone rings, but otherwise, I'm going to get on with my life. I got a job at my dad's company. I, started a bank account. I went to the dentist. I started pulling myself out of the rock and roll dream world and becoming a regular tax-paying human.
Some people call that growing up, but it's
Growing
like,
up. I mean, I was 29, and it seemed like it was time to do that. So
little did you know.
And I was putting out the fire in my belly and like, calm down, it's going to be all right. That's when I got a call at my dad's shop from Earthquake Morton, my old friend, who is now working at a booking management company office, Tim Collins. And Earthquake calls and says, Mach, I need you to come out to Boston on Friday, an audition for the Joe Perry project. I said, what? He says, yeah, Joe, his management's just been taken over by Tim Collins. I was familiar with Tim. He was somebody who had booked Thundertrain in the past. Joe Perry is being managed by Tim Collins, and he needs a lead singer. I had heard through the grapevine that Charlie Farron had left Joe Perry, he was the singer, to sign his own record deal and do his own thing.
Fahrenheit.
So, but audition. The only time I'd ever auditioned was that time I went out to Bobby's band in Medway to sing. The first time I'd never been a singer before, and now I had been singing ever since then for 10 years, but now I have to audition in front of this, rock star, Joe Perry. I was a big fan of Aerosmith in the beginning, but I grew to be very jealous of Aerosmith and their success. Like I think a lot of us in the Boston rock scene we didn't want to hear about Aerosmith. You know, when I heard about Aerosmith, it was somebody in the back of the club, hey, play some Aerosmith. You know, go away, you know. We do our own thing. So Aerosmith had clouded over in my head, and Joe Perry, and I had been in awe of them when I first saw them, though, that's for sure. And I knew what was going on, and I knew that it would be life-changing if I ever could get a gig like that. But I was damned if I was going to have the door slammed in my face again, like it had been by so many record companies and so many agents and you name it. You know, it's just always knocking on doors and trying to move your band forward, and most of those doors slam in your face. And I was finally getting away from that. I said no. Earthquake wouldn't give up. He called me back. He said, no choice. This isn't a yes or no. You are coming down and you're going to do it because this gig is yours, man. You're perfect for Joe. This is going to be great. So I auditioned for the Joe Perry project. You know, this is People magazine from last year. I didn't know I was going to be on TV today, actually, but I happened to always carry my People magazine with me. So here I am with the Joe Perry project.
Oh my God!
This is from.
You look like Olivia Newton-John.
See, I still had a little bit of glam left in me, and this is like years later. This is 10 years after Thundertrain. Anyway, Joe Perry project happened. I kept a diary of my 2.5 years on the road with Joe. It was a rocky road. Joe had health problems. We helped him through it. He came back stronger than ever. I wrote a song. First song I wrote with Joe was Once a Rocker, Always a Rocker. That's the name of this book that I wrote. That's the name of this book that I wrote. It's actually a book that I wrote when I was with Joe, the diaries that I kept. I just had to resuscitate the diaries and correct some spelling, and it became this book that's been out for almost 2 years now. It's also an audio book. Once a rocker, always a rocker. So not only did I get to record with Joe and tour with Joe, but now here we are all these years later, and the book has reopened my tributaries with all those Joe Perry and Thundertrain people from all those decades ago. It's been the most amazing last couple of years, I got to say. For all that doing it and rocking it was amazing. Having this unexpected thing happen at this point in my life, releasing the diary and going around and getting to do shows like this and meeting people. I'm going to do the Northeast Comic-Con Independence Day weekend if everything, knock on wood, works out, and I'll get to meet people and bring your Thundertrain record, bring your Joe Perry project stuff, and I'll be signing stuff and meeting everybody. That's the 2nd through 4th out in Boxborough on 495 at the Boxborough Regency Hotel. See, I get to plug again, too.
Yeah, see, plugging's great. But I want to back up on something, and it's something that you and I sort of talked about before. It's like, So in all the time that you played with Thundertrain, and I thought they were creative and fun and like, just like a band that, in a lot of people's estimation, it's not just mine, that really should have made it bigger or like should have, whatever. So you kind of fell through the cracks or whatever. It's like we were talking about beforehand about there's all these great bands that I just get introduced to now that were around during the. I didn't know. I'd never even heard of Wishbone Ash until like I was 20. I never heard of like different bands, and Silverhead I only heard about from you guys. But so you have this great creative band that had a real big impact on like the Boston rock scene, and then the dream that you thought that you wanted from when you were in Thundertrain, you get to experience with Joe Perry Project. Only it's got to be in the back of your head that that what you guys did before was probably a lot cooler and more creative than playing with the Joe Perry band in a lot of ways, I would imagine. I mean, it's like, it's great that you got to live the rock star lifestyle. You got to experience what that was like. But from a creativity standpoint, I wonder, I could be wrong. I could be projecting here. So,
Yeah. No, it's definitely coming up together with a group of guys, moving into the Thundertrain mansion and being a democracy. We all had a vote. It wasn't like, this is my band kind of thing. We all had, for anything to fly, it was a 5-way. Joe Perry Project. At the end of the day, I had to remind myself that I was just a hired gun.
yep.
This was Joe Perry. We were getting hired on Joe Perry's name and his past affiliations with Aerosmith more than we were getting hired because Joe's hooked up with Cowboy Mach Bell, or hey, that guy used to play with Thundertrain. Nobody, when you're playing in Caracas, nobody knows knows that stuff. Outside of 35-mile radius of Boston, my fame dwindles. There were times, most of the time, it really felt like we were a band with Joe Perry Project. We traveled together in our van. We ate and lived and slept, and it was the band experience. But there would be those times, like if we were going to do something like this, where all of a sudden it was like Joe Perry be hustled in to do the interview, and the rest of us, be out sitting on the curb, waiting for the boss to come back out. At times that would great. At other times it was like, thank goodness he's in there, sweating, trying to answer questions. So, I could be out here doing something more, drinking a 40 or whatever. But yeah, it was very different. It's like grandmothers say, you can do everything in your life, you just can't do it all at the same time. And
You really did get to live the best of both worlds, though. I mean, you got to see the big rock star thing, travel around the world, play with, in big arenas, and you got to be in a really kind of creative force of a band that really had an impact in a different kind of way. But yeah, and I think a lot of the guys that I talk to, most of the musicians that I talk to, it's like they just really like playing still. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. Almost everybody that I know that plays, and it's like they, we had like Ralph Fatello was in here a little while ago with the Vinny Band, and Ralph's still playing stuff, and like Frank Rowe is still playing stuff, and like like I talked to JJ a little while ago, and he's had a band right up until pre-COVID, and all people just like to play, So
that's what we're wired to do. I agree with that, and I still do play. I work with kids a lot. I work at a center out in Framingham, and I run a music room and play music with kids. But I got to say, running a close second and sometimes neck and neck is getting to write about all that stuff.
Yeah.
Write about it, reliving it through the writing, and trying to bring it to life for other people. That's been a really incredible experience. And I'll give you an exclusive. I'm at the moment, I'm back at it again. I'm writing. That's one of the reasons I think I was able to talk about what happened during the 70s in a more lucid way than I might have a few months ago because it's on my mind right now a lot. Because this book is a memoir of 2.5 years on the road with Joe Perry. It does go back to Thundertrain and the Rat and all that quite a bit in the book. But my new book, we're really going to explore the Boston scene more. My teenage Mechanical Onion years, which everybody wants. That's what everybody wants, the Mechanical Onions. But more about the Boston scene and the different rockers I knew and things that we did together. And then looking at Joe Perry project years from a different vantage point than I did in the diary, because that's a diary. This
Right.
is more of a book. So the new one's a 20-year memoir. It's 66 to 86. So that's what I'm working on right now. I can't put down my pen.
That's good. I mean, writing is work. That's what I do for a living. So it's like it's always a lot more work. I did something recently and about a prank that I did years and years ago, and I'm writing about it. It's like it's work. I mean, you think you have that story. Oh yeah, I'll just do this and that. And it's no, and it's like, and then expressing it in a creative way, in a way that's going to make sense to other people is like,
Yes.
yeah. And then you get those flood of memories too.
Well, I
so.
remember when I was a kid, I used to look at Playboy magazine, and there used to be Playboy party jokes on the back of the centerfold, and they'd have these hilarious jokes.
Yep.
And you go, oh, this is a good one. I'm going to tell everybody. And then you go out and you tell the joke you read in the Playboy. It doesn't sound as good as it did because the writer writes it efficiently and perfectly and gets the joke out with as few words as possible and as much funniness as possible. And that's what it's like when I'm writing these books. I'm constantly honing it down and trying to pick the words to really bring it to life in the reader. And to really, whether I'm trying to make you cry, laugh, or get sick to your stomach, I want that visceral thing to happen, and I'm trying to make it happen in one short, tough little paragraph. And, that could take a long time to craft. So, yeah.
Well, what you can do is you can just listen to the audio of Rat Tales, and then you can just transcribe it, and you won't have to spend so much time writing. But we really, really appreciate having you on here today. It was great. The last time, this is the second time we've done this. The last time we did it was the day of the insurrection on January 6th. And my phone was blowing up the whole time I was talking to Mach. So hopefully when we leave the studio today, there won't be anything disastrous or cataclysmic that happened out in the real world. But it's been great having you on. It's been great talking to you too, Mach. Thanks.
Thank you, Mike. And thank you for doing this show too. This and the other podcast that you and Lenny did before this with the Boston rock stories from the 60s. I love these. I love to read them, and I'm honored to have my episode in amongst all this stuff.
Cool. Thanks, man. Thanks for listening to Rat Tales, Boston Rock Stories. Rat Tales is produced and directed by Lenny, Scolletta, and Mike Hoban, with a huge thanks to Medford Community Media in beautiful downtown Medford, Massachusetts.